Libraries Committee, I am delighted to welcome Shelley Hamilton, who will speak with us about the important work that Marin Promise Partnership is doing to promote educational equity throughout Marin County. Shelley is the Director of Research and Communications for Marin Promise Partnership. She has an MA in Organizational Design from Fielding Graduate University and was recently elected to the Ross Valley School Board, where she serves as board president. And I am so happy to say that she is also a member of our league and has been for some time. At Marin Promise Partnership, Shelley has a vital role in designing and facilitating collaboration. And this is vital because, as Shelley will tell you, Marin Promise Partnership works on the principle of people and organizations taking collaborative action toward a shared goal of educational equity. Shelley brings more than 20 years of both practical nonprofit management and consulting experience to this work. This has gained her deep expertise in using written and visual communication tools to build bridges across people, institutions, and sectors. She also brings to this work her values of compassion, equity, integrity, and justice, and her commitment to living those values in all aspects of her life. When we first met Shelley, as a member of our Education Libraries Committee, she was CEO of Marin Space and a strategic planning consultant in fields ranging from social purpose real estate and information technology to civic engagement, cross-cultural education, and environmental sustainability. From there, she moved to Marin Promise, joining them early in the organization's development. And early in 2018, she and Ann Matheson, who is CEO and founder of Marin Promise, suggested that our league join the partnership. We have been partners in this important collaboration ever since. And this is one of the many reasons our committee is so pleased to have Shelley here today to bring us up to date on the partnership's work. So with that, I will turn this over to Shelley.
Thank you, Anne. Hope everyone can hear me. I am incredibly honored to be here today, and really, it's a pleasure to be able to come and make this presentation for the entire partnership. I know a similar presentation was made to the Education Committee.
Shelley, we're having a little trouble hearing you. Can you?
Let's see, let me make sure that my speaker is on. Okay, is that a little bit better?
It absolutely is.
Yes. Okay, great. All right, well, let me go ahead. I'm going to share my screen and get this presentation started here. Hold on a second. All right. Okay, how does that look? Can everybody see that just fine?
Yep.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to be, let me make sure I can, oh, it's not navigating. How do I make this? There we go. All right. So a little bit about today's presentation, welcome and a check-in, overview of the partnership, talk a little bit about how the partnership operates, highlight some priorities for this year, and then spend some time talking to you a little bit about what we have learned with respect to the impact of COVID-19 on education and equity, and some of the responses to that, some of the partnership and partner responses to what's happening in education with respect to COVID-19. I'll stop a couple times for question and answer to make it as interactive as possible. One of the other elements of the partnership, as Anne had mentioned, is that it really is about collaboration and organizations and individuals and institutions and sectors all working together. And part of one of our regular practices before engaging is to just take a second and ground ourselves, not in our values and what is coming up for you right now. This has been an incredibly challenging past year, past week. there's a lot going on. And so I just wanted to start out. This is our regular practice with all of our action teams, our board, our leadership teams, is to just take a second and think a minute about the quote that's on the screen here from James Baldwin and everything that's happened. And in the chat box, if you could just share with everyone a personal value that you hold dear to yourself and that you bring with you to the work that you do in the league or with organizations that you're involved in now more than ever. Just one word value, and then one quick thought about what you would like to get out of this session. That's another practice that we have, is continuous improvement. And so it really helps us to understand, what are you curious about, so that the next presentation that I make can be enhanced, and that I can listen to that when I'm looking at answers and questions that you might have. So just take 1 minute, and in the chat box, go into the chat box and go ahead and answer those 2 questions very quickly. Good, I'm seeing a lot of community, integrity, kindness, honesty, free press, compassion, and equity. And go ahead and enter if there's anything in particular around educational equity that you're especially curious about. Understanding how the league interacts with Marin Promise, great. Leveling the playing field around education. Lots of questions around equity, education equity, and how that's showing up. How can we actually make educational equity work? Question around education on the national level, Department of Education, equal access, lifelong learning. Great. All right, well, while you continue, feel free to continue to add things into the chat box, and I'll just continue to go continue on with the presentation. So the vision for the partnership is that every child in Marin can reach their full educational potential, especially regardless of race, ethnicity, or family income. That's the vision for the future of education in Marin County. And for far too long, the equity gap in Marin County, as you can see, has been basically the same for many, many years. We looked all the way back to 2002. And the vision is that by working together, we can promise that we will close this gap by 2028. So that along the journey of education from cradle all the way to career, it is a lifelong learning, but from our youngest kids to our oldest kids, that will close those gaps. We have a little short introduction video that.
And thank you for your interest in Marin Promise Partnership, a cross-sector collective impact network of over 40 schools, nonprofits, businesses, and government agencies. Marin Promise Partners believe that every child in Marin can reach his or her full educational potential, regardless of race, ethnicity, or income. Many in our county share this belief. We have an abundance of effort and resources directed towards our 18 school districts, hundreds of individual PTAs, booster clubs, school foundations, nonprofits, and community organizations, all run by smart, dedicated, big-hearted people with deep compassion for our most vulnerable kids. Despite all of this effort, educational inequity in Marin has been a large and persistent problem. In fact, there are still about 7,000 children falling into the deepest equity gap in the state of California, all along 6 key developmental milestones, from cradle to career, from kindergarten readiness to 3rd grade reading and 9th grade math, and from college readiness to enrollment and completion. About a third of Marin students are not reaching their full educational potential. Why don't our individual contributions add up to success for all kids? Why haven't our abundant resources closed this gap? The problem is not with our students, parents, teachers, administrators, counselors, mentors, funders, or nonprofit community leaders. The problem is that each of these groups operate in silos in which efforts are fragmented, disconnected, unaccountable to each other, and perhaps most importantly, a system that as a whole was not historically designed with equity in mind. That's why Marin Promise Partnership was formed, to close the educational equity gaps by 2028 through a systems approach with results at the center. How does Marin Promise Partnership do this? Well, as a partnership, we don't teach math or tutor kids or award scholarships or provide any kind of direct service, because that's what the individual partners are already doing and doing well. Instead, the program expertise of community partners is combined with the process know-how of backbone staff, so that together the partners can accomplish what none of them could do alone. Using the Strive Together collective impact framework, partners are aligning around a common vision, holding each other accountable, taking collective action, and advocating for equitable systemic change. Here's how it works. The backbone team helps bring together the right people in the same room to align around a common vision under a proven Cradle to Career framework. Partners agree to share data and to hold each other accountable to collective goals and objectives. Action teams, guided by backbone team facilitators, develop common strategies and take collective action, all the while measuring and continuously improving toward results. The Partnership Council and its executive committee advocate for systemic changes in practices and policies, all the while keeping equity at the center, knowing that some kids may need more assistance to achieve similar outcomes. This work is challenging, often uncomfortable, and always complex. But to close the equity gap once and for all, it must be done, and each and every partner is dedicated to making it happen. Help us keep our promise to our kids. Join the partnership, and together we can assure that every child in Marin can meet the educational milestones critical to achieving a bright and successful future.
So that introduction video is available on our website, right on the home page of the website. So if you ever want to go back and refer to any of that, you can go ahead and watch that right from the home page of the website. Now I'm going to just go over some of the more recent updates and a few highlights from what you saw in here. Let's see. Oops. There we go. So this is an overview of how the partnership is organized. I noticed there was a comment in the chat about what you wanted to understand, which is how the league is involved in the partnership and how others can be involved in the partnership. So partners are really any individual or organization that wants to make a dedicated commitment to educational equity. There are action teams and initiative groups that work on a regular basis that have a consistent membership. And I'll talk a little bit more about those action teams. So that's one level of engagement that partners have. We have recently launched, in fact, just a month ago, a youth and family council, which is somewhere in between the governance bodies and the action teams. And those are community members and individuals and students and young people and parents and community advocates who speak many different languages, come from all over the county and have many different backgrounds, and are engaged, as I said, with the action teams as well as a governance body to ensure that the policies and the decisions that the partnership is making is being done in alignment and in consultation and with the advice of the lived experience of people in our community around their experience with education. And then the other governance bodies are the Partnership Council and the Leadership Team. And those are the partnership, the governance bodies. The League of Women Voters is part of the Partnership Council. These bodies meet on a regular basis and have an annual planning meeting as well. And then just this year or last year, the Backbone Support Organization, which is the staff and now includes a board, recently incorporated as a separate 501c3. So this is very much of a collaborative, inclusive operating structure, if you will, that includes both a board and staff supporting, which is part of the collective impact approach, is that in order for collaboration to happen, it just doesn't happen magically, as you all know, it being part of the league, that there's a lot of infrastructure support that's needed. And so the Backbone support staff and the board provide that structure and support holder for the partnership. All of those bodies and everyone involved makes a commitment to the core values of the partnership around equity, justice, integrity, and compassion. And that's the core of what holds all of the partners together in the work that they do for educational equity. As mentioned, it's a cradle to career approach. So there are 6 milestone areas that all of the initiatives and all of the action teams are working towards. So there are a number of specific and standing action teams that meet, as I mentioned, on a regular basis. Some meet monthly, some about 6 times a year. So if you're interested in any of these particular issue areas, partners are welcome and invited to participate on a specific action team. So there's kindergarten readiness action teams. We just last year brought together our college and career readiness and college and career program enrollment teams because we were noticing that it was a lot of the similar partners coming together to the similar action teams. So we decided that since they were all focused on college and career, we wanted to knit them together. So we've got a readiness enrollment team that meets. We also have started some very targeted support site-based teams, so success networks and site-based teams that really focus on specific schools like Tam High School, Redwood High School, and Tamales, and bring all of the partners together around a specific cohort of students. And then we also have cross-milestone initiatives. Around one of the initiatives that you all have been involved in is the anti-racism and cultural responsiveness work and doing organizational self-assessments. And some of the ones that I'll talk about a little bit later that are newer are around what we're calling tech equity, closing the digital divide in the learning hubs. So these are the different kind of action teams and initiatives that the partnership and all of the partners are involved in. As you'll notice in my presentation and throughout a lot of the work that we do, it's very much focused on data and measurable outcomes, both as a way of inspiring action, but it's also a continuous learning process. And so all of the action teams in the partnership set goals, and then on a regular basis, we look at how are we doing in terms of educational equity across cradle to career. So we produce an annual progress report. And it's updated as the information comes in. So we recently got information from last year's college enrollment that's on the website. It's very interactive. You can go onto the website, you can drill down into any of these areas and see more detail all the way down to the school level or the district level or on a countywide basis. And you can also disaggregate it by race and by income. So you can do a lot of interactive data on our website. One of the other major initiatives that has been embraced by all of the leadership bodies, from the board to the leadership team and the partnership council, is really moving towards a actively and boldly affirming racial equity through an anti-racist approach. And they have all gone through a series of trainings around what that means and had conversations about moving not only their individual work that they do, but institutions and entire systems from what we have found in Marin to be from a lot of individual ad hoc kind of workarounds to really making systemic change, and from moving from talk into action around policy and practice shifts, and to embracing discomfort in a lot of the work that we do. It's not always going to be comfortable. It's respectful, But it's okay to have some discomfort in a lot of the conversations that we have. All right, so before I get into the priorities and highlights, I'm just going to stop and see if there are any questions around that general overview of the partnership. Oh, I think you're on mute, Sue. Oh, Sue Ann.
Shelley, there's a number of them in the chat box. Do you want me to go over them with you? There are people who ask specific questions.
Sure. If you
Yeah.
want to watch,
Yeah, you want to go with it?
no, you go ahead and see if you can.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll go with the first one from Barbara Rowe. Is the Canal Alliance University Prep Program connected with Marin Promise?
Yes, they are. In fact, I had been leading the college enrollment action team, and they had been an active member for many, many years. So yes, they're involved in the college readiness and the college enrollment team.
Okay. This is from Cheryl Longinati. I'm curious as to how this model for educational change or closing the gap came about. Is there a model from another community or ?
Yes. So we are part of a national movement. Strive Together is the national organization, and I believe there are 80 some odd communities across the country that are part of the Strive Together. Strive was one of the very first organizations or partnerships, if you may, networks that started the collective impact approach. So they were hand in hand as collective impact was emerging. In fact, they started in Cincinnati and were one of the very first collective impact initiatives in the country. We are also part of just recently a California cohort. So Fresno, Monterey County, Sonoma, us, I forget the other, there's about 6 different communities that are part of a California cohort that includes both Promise neighborhoods, if you're familiar, Promise neighborhoods and Promise communities, and Cradle to career communities. And they've recently gotten funding to hire a legislative, you guys should know this, a legislative advocate. So they're working with an organization in Sacramento to count statewide education initiatives. So yes, part of a much larger movement.
Great. And then there were 2 questions along the same line about the 3 high schools that you mentioned. I believe they were Tam, Redwood, and Tamales. Why those 3 high schools and why not others in the county, such as San Rafael?
Sure. So we work with all of the high schools in the county. So those 3 were called out. So most of our work centers in the Novato School District, San Rafael School District, Shoreline School District, and Tam and Southern Marin School Districts. Those 3 specific schools were called out because one of the initiatives, and I'll get into this in the priorities, have adopted or expanded on. Tam High School had what they called a success network, and that was a very intensive wraparound support service for high school students who needed extra support, where it brought all of the partners together along with the school counselors and school administrative staff to look at a student level basis to provide that additional support for students and to work as a cross-sector team. So that has recently been expanded to Redwood High School and Shoreline, that methodology. So those 3 were called out for that, but we work with schools throughout the entire county, not just those schools.
Great. And then the last question is, with the world we're living in right now with COVID and distance learning and some of the difficulties with that, are you guys anticipating we're going to see a step backwards in some of these results?
Yes, and I'll hold that. We've actually got some initial data that is showing some of those impacts. So I'm going to hold that for the end and we can get into that in a little bit more detail.
Great. Okay. I think that was that for that first round.
All right. So every year the partnership goes through a planning process. The backbone staff start with looking at assessing the past year and making some proposals to the leadership team and the board and the partnership council for priorities to focus on in the next year. So I want to show you a little bit about the highlights and priorities for the 2021 school year. These were all set prior to COVID, and so we have actually been through a lot of rapid cycle adaptation this year in implementing these. the way that we look, you'll see the little dials on the top. It's all of the action teams and bodies engage in a very rigorous and specific collaborative improvement process, starting with looking at the landscape of what's the goal, what are people doing, what are the factors that are creating the barriers, and looking at the baseline data. Then engaging with that data to articulate practice shifts that the partnership think can make a difference, and then taking action and then continuously improving on that action. And through that process, we've identified a few priorities and initiative areas that have already gone through that whole cycle at least once. Actually, that in order for us to say they're working, they've gone through the cycle several times, and we have data that can show that they're working. So in that area, milestone, that's the success networks that I mentioned have shown some very successful data. Improving financial aid services in schools and increasing student participation for the college and career completion in summer bridge and affinity groups. Promising practices are practices that have been identified by the action teams and initiative groups as showing some initial promise of being impactful in closing equity gaps. And things that are worth testing are in the early stages of work. The two in italics at the end are two areas that are just emerging mainly out of COVID. Those are some of our newest ones. So we have both milestone specific practices that the action teams are working on, as well as these cross milestone initiatives. So some of these may look familiar from the prior slides around increasing cultural responsiveness and taking collective action on anti-racist actions, closing the digital divide. We have a Marin Educators for Equity initiative, which is promoting aligned pathways into teaching for Black, Indigenous, people of color in education sector. And one of the emerging ones is increasing equity in school funding. And then I'll talk a little bit more later about learning hubs and COVID-19 impacts. So I just wanted to highlight a few of these. We don't have time to go through all of those highlights, but again, the success network that I mentioned with those 3 schools, the reason that it is in the area of what's working is that at TAM High School, before students, the A to G on track is students that are eligible for UC and CSU enrollment and applications, and they really showed an amazing improvement in the number of students who are part of that success network. The way that we look at students is we've got a population level number that we look at, and then each school identifies what are called focus students, and that is a cohort of students that are either low income, students of color, English language learners, homeless foster youth, or identified as counselors as having something going on in their lives that is creating a barrier to learning. So every school has a focused student group, and at TAM High School in the Success Network, they showed a great improvement when all of the partners came together, focused on these students, and provided wraparound supports.
Excuse me, Shelley, could you remind people what the A to G, A to G stands for?
Sure. So A to G, the college readiness is really focused on the number of students who are graduating high school eligible to apply for UCs and CSUs. And in order for a student to be able to apply to a UC or CSU, they need to have successfully completed what are called A to G classes. And those are specific classes in high school in English and in math and social studies that create your eligibility to apply for college. So it's not just about graduating high school, but in order to keep that door open for higher education, students need to have completed high school with a certain suite of classes that they've completed. One of the other initiatives that is really being successful is a partnership between 10,000 Degrees College of Marin, Santa Rosa Junior College, Dominican, and a lot of the other partners around summer bridge or pre-college activities, plus students being in affinity groups. So that's bridging from the high school into their college experience, because there's a lot of data that says success in the early years of college. So the persistence rate into second year of college has a major predictive indicator for whether that student is going to complete college within 6 years. And one way to help students be successful right off of the bat when they get into college is to give them a bridging experience between high school and college, and then to connect them up with peers and affinity groups during their first year of college. So College of Marin and 10,000 Degrees have been really successful. And you can see some of the statistics that show, compared to students that have neither of those two supports at 57%, when students have both of those supports, it really improves their persistence into the second year and then on into completing college. A couple of other highlights to bring about. We have on our website, we now have a lot of information that you can drill down to on school funding and equity in school funding, or inequity in school funding, if you may. And that there's a vast difference in our county on funding equity, both from the federal and state money that schools have, as well as locally controlled funding in terms of parcel tax grants, foundations, things like that. Right now, we're just at the stage where we've collected the data, and we're looking probably in this year at some point, continuing on that process and gathering a group together to discuss what could be done about it. Another highlight is around promoting countywide efforts to close the digital divide. And this was started before COVID and has just been accelerated during COVID. We're actually joined Digital Marin. If this is a new initiative, I don't know if you all know about Digital Marin, but if you look up Digital Marin in Marin County, it's a countywide initiative across all sectors. And there's an education specific work group that Marin Promise Partnership is part of. We actually just got a grant for a fellow to be working with us for the whole year to work on closing the digital divide, specifically with education. So looking at hotspots and internet access and things like digital literacy to help close that digital divide. So that it's not just about accessing the internet, but it's also about being successful in students and families' ability to use broadband internet as a learning tool. So that whole scope. And then one last element to highlight is the work that we're doing with all of the partners on taking an organizational self-assessment around equity and anti-racist actions and helping to inspire, motivate, and assist organizations that want to make racial equity statements. I know a lot more school districts are putting forward equity statements around curriculum, and organizations are having conversations and creating teams to develop their racial equity statements and approaches. And so we're always here as backbone staff to help organizations with that initiative. So I'm going to take a pause here as well and see if anyone has any questions. And I don't know if you want to make any comments about the league's experience working with the partnership on the equity assessment. I think you all were engaged in that.
Actually, the board did the racial equity assessment. It would be nice to do it again with a larger group. But we had a very interesting experience. There's a questionnaire, I guess we would call it, that asks about your organization with respect to all kinds of aspects of racial equity, your how you present yourself, how you operate, the makeup of your organization. It was a really interesting process for our board to go through. We did this over 3 different board meetings. We set aside time. And at first we were thinking, goodness, we have to answer no to everything. But then we began to really think about it and look at the league's positions around racial equity. And it became extremely engaging. We learned a lot about ourselves. I think it's something that, as I say, I think we should do it again, do it with a larger group of people. But I know we fed our data into the whole conglomerate here. How many people participated in this, in doing the survey, Shelley?
How many organizations?
Uh-huh.
I think we had about, I don't know off the top of my head. Well, you can see the blue lines there are percentage. So I know we had about 80 some odd % of partners participate in this. We are planning on doing, as you mentioned, another round this year to do an update. On our website, we do have the summary report of those of the different scores of the different sections, so you can go in and actually look at some of the questions that are asked and some of the areas that are asked that the organizations or partners participated in. But as you can see, from Q4 in 18-19 through the 19-20, the goal is to increase not only the number of partners that are taking the self-assessment, but also the actions that are being that they're taking out of that. We're also doing it second round as a backbone team. So the backbone team does this as well, and we're in the process of it. And as you mentioned, it's really meant to be both an institutional learning tool. So it's really about a learning tool. Like you said, we did this very similar things where you say no, and then you say, well, but yeah, we are doing this. And then it's a conversation tool. It's really a good kind of reflective conversation tool. It's not just like a metric or a report card. In fact, it's more important that it is a conversation tool for reflection.
And it's really important for our league to do this and to be aware of this, because the National League has a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, and we have to have a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement in our bylaws. And we are, in fact, putting together this year a DEI task force to begin looking in greater depth at how our league can increase diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Are there any other questions, Sue, about highlights and, oop, you're on mute. Hold on, Sue, you're muted.
I got it. Okay. We have a question here from Cheryl Longinati. Does Marin have sufficient career program opportunities for those who are not academically inclined or college oriented?
So that is an area actually that we've seen a lot more activity. I know College of Marin has actually, College of Marin in partnership with the Marin County Office of Education has launched quite a number of additional CTEs, they're called, Career Technical Education Programs. A lot of them are up at their Indian Valley campus. And Marin County Office of Education also, up until COVID, had actually a very robust summer program of hands-on learning, everything from web design to hospitality and cooking. And a lot of those internship opportunities, I think, have been put on pause during COVID, but it is definitely something that seems to be emerging as a lot more initiative and effort being put in that area. One of the other action teams that we have going, and one of the conversations within the partnership, is how to create pathways that can intersect with each other, and that students graduate high school. There's a group effort called Keeping Every Door Open, KEDO. So there's this conversation around how to create intersecting pathways for students so that they graduate high school, college and career ready, not college or career ready. So that if a student does want to go into the career technical education pathway right out of high school, that they've graduated high school with the doors open to higher education, so that they're not tracked and that they don't have higher education closed off to them. So that if they want to go back into a four-year college after some career technical, they can. And as we know, people's lives weave a lot more. It's not quite as straight a path once you get out of high school. And the idea is how to create those opportunities that that students can move in and out of from traditional four-year colleges and career technical, so that the students don't get trapped, but still have a variety of opportunities available.
Great. Okay. Ann Wakely, it would be good to have someone from College of Marin who's involved with career education fill us in on what they're doing. I think that's an excellent idea. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'd be happy to connect you up. I think we could be happy to connect you up with some of the folks that are working in that arena.
Great. Okay. I think unless anybody has another question, we can go on to the next part. Good to go. Okay.
Wait and see if anyone raises their hand. And we can always come back to this if something comes up at the end. All right, so this is, for lack of a better word, hot off the presses, some initial kind of what we're seeing from the Backbone team, because we have an advantage point from being able to see across all of the districts and all of the action teams and assess kind of where we're seeing the impact showing up in COVID-19 and some of the emerging responses. So generally speaking, what we're seeing is that the major impact areas of COVID-19 are falling into basically three kinds of areas. So one area is obviously engagement with learning, with distance learning, and now a majority of districts have moved into hybrid learning. But all districts have offered families the opportunity to stay in distance learning if they so choose. And hybrid learning is really a combination of in-person and distance learning. So it's usually either an AM/PM model or an AB block model where students are going to school 2 full days a week and this other half. And a lot of that, and that is basically in order to create smaller cohorts to create distance, social distancing in the classroom. What you probably have seen in the newspaper and is showing up in Marin County as well is that both enrollment and attendance have decreased because of COVID-19. That there are a lot of students who just have not re-enrolled in school or have moved over to other types of either homeschooling or other out of the public school system. Engagement is also an issue. In terms of keeping students engaged in learning. Attendance, the state had shifted over its attendance practices. Average daily attendance funding is no longer, or funding from the state has been put on a pause into a different way. So normally state funding is through average daily attendance. The state has said schools are going to keep their funding flat. They still have to collect attendance data, but they have more flexibility in how they collect that attendance data because students are in different types of learning environments and they don't get dinged from their funding. So that's one of, and I've got a slide with some initial information on that. Also, academics, assessments and grades, as you probably knew in the beginning. So last spring when COVID hit, a lot of districts were trying to figure out how they were going to do their grading at the end of the year, given that this crisis management was in place. And many districts changed their grading policies. This fall, all of the districts went back to standard A through F grading policies. And we're starting to see, just like we've heard from across the state and across the country, that there's a dramatic increase in failing grades and incompletes. A lot more students are on what are called the DFI list, meaning Ds are getting Ds, Fs, or incompletes. We're hearing that a lot of students are having difficulty, especially students with English as a second language with accelerated, what are called the 3x3. So students are taking what would have been a semester or a year-long class in a semester, but they're taking fewer classes. Continued issues with internet access, digital literacy, and then just the self-regulation and discipline that it takes to do distance learning is a whole skill set that especially the younger students in 9th grade have not exercised those muscles as much as seniors and older students have. So that's an academic challenge. And then obviously the well-being and emotional health is we're seeing a lot more requests for counselor referrals because of stress and anxiety and trauma and new roles at home. So some of the early metrics that we're seeing in this area is chronic absenteeism is on the rise. The chart in the upper, right-hand corner there is coming from some of the measurements for the success students, the network success students, which are the students who have already, even prior to COVID, were having challenges with academics and chronic absenteeism going up. The college enrollment data that you're seeing there, we just literally, like, I don't know how many weeks ago, got the enrollment data. And as we were predicting, the enrollment, college enrollment, you can see that last line from 2019 to 2020 dramatically decreased and the gaps increased. So we were expecting to see that, and we're starting to see those numbers come in as well, so that the all of the gains that we had seen since 2013 have been precipitously lost in many ways due to COVID. Cross our fingers that the infrastructure, the collaborative infrastructure, and the initiatives will help bring that back up once we get out of COVID. But those are some of the initial data that we're seeing on attendance and chronic absenteeism. With respect to assessments and grading, we are definitely starting to see, just as we've heard from across the state and nationally, that the students who are failing, the numbers of students who are failing are dramatically increasing. So the blue bars are all students in a school, and the purple bars are students who are on the D's, F's, and I's lists that are the focus students. So these are the students who are either English language learners, low income students, first gen, those kinds of things. And so in addition to all of the amazing work that individual schools are doing to support their students, and the training that they're doing for teachers, and the amazing effort, especially to not only go into distance learning, but then to make another transition into the hybrid learning models, as I mentioned, and training teachers. So many teachers now have what are called roomers and zoomers. So they've got students who are zooming into their classroom and students who are physically in their classroom. And so the schools are doing some just amazing work as best they can and putting everything into this. And then there's also some collaborative efforts. And one of the main collaborative efforts that we've been involved in has been around learning hubs. So working with the County Office of Education and all of our partners, there have been some amazing stories of collaboration pulling together in very rapid succession these learning hubs. So these are not replacing school, but they are during school to help students connect to their distance learning, either if they're permanently in distance learning in the distance learning academies, or if they're in hybrid and they've got afternoons where they're still connecting in school, or they've got 2 or 3 days a week where they're in distance learning and need additional assistance. So the learning hubs are really focused on students that are identified by their schools or community-based organizations as needing additional in-person support. They're helping to reduce the digital divide and providing broadband access when students don't have that, or if students have difficult home environments where it's hard for them to learn, this is a place that they can go that's quiet and focused on learning. It's a place where they can have adult supervision, so it improves their safety, and they can have some peer interaction. They are in small cohorts, less than 14 students. And again, it's meant to support students. And right now we've got a website we're tracking all of this information on learning hubs. So when we started out, I think there was about a dozen learning hubs in the very beginning. We're up to about 55 hubs across the county, serving about 16% of students living in poverty and about 10% of the students of color. We've created a shared attendance data system that these hubs can use, and that's really helping to connect and coordinate school and hub and family communication, so that the attendance data system is shared with the schools. So the schools have real-time, anytime access to see which students are participating in the learning hubs, are they showing up, and can track any type of incidences or needs that those students have and share that in real time with the schools. And it also provides the ability to do collective advocacy and fundraising for student needs in learning hubs. So I think I'm going to stop again and see. Let me make sure. Yes. So really appreciate an opportunity to come and meet with you all, and would love to just have a conversation and answer any other questions and hear from you all.
Shelley, we had one other question from Ann Wakely about, is the absenteeism data for all grades?
That chronic absenteeism was just a, it was for a particular cohort of students. So that was not countywide or all grades. That was just a snapshot. And right now, one of the challenges with data, public education data, is that the lag time for collecting the data can be so long that it's hard to be actionable in a rapid crisis environment. And so right now, a lot of our rapid cycle data that we're gathering are from specific schools and specific targeted cohorts as indicators of where the rest of the county might go. So for example, the full attendance data doesn't usually come out from the state until April, March or April. By then it's, most of the school year's over and it's hard to be actionable data. So right now what we're focusing on is specific cohorts of students that we know have traditionally been underrepresented or underserved in education, and looking at those students as indicators at this moment. So.
And then Ann, did you have a learning hub question? And you're muted.
Okay. Shelley, if you like, we can, you can stop sharing and we can see each other and talk. Unless people have specific questions about slides.
And I can also share, go to the website. Most of this information you can find on our website as well. And with respect to also the interactive data. And then we've got the Learning Hubs portal. And we do our best to try and keep all of the data up to date as best we can.
Yeah, their website is really terrific, and being able to drill down into the data. You guys have done an amazing job with that portal. It's really terrific. That whole dashboard is great.
So learning hubs, I mean, I just have several questions about learning hubs, but I'll try to condense it. I'm just really curious about how they work. Mm-hmm. And I'm also wondering if there's an effort to expand to include more children. Mm-hmm. And if what you're seeing from these learning hubs suggests that maybe this is an important model going forward, even after COVID-19, if this in fact would be something that schools, communities would want to try to continue.
Well, yes to all of the above. And actually they all intersect with each other. We brought together, so part of what we do is we convene and bring partners together. So we had our first learning hub when we were seeing this as a growing initiative, if you will, grassroots coming out of the community. These learning hubs were put together. There was funding. Marin County Office of Education received funding from Bank of Marin. They now also have funding from Marin Community Foundation. There are some grassroots kind of GoFundMe funds that are also being pulled together and have helped to do the matchmaking and brokering, because there were some places, the way that the learning hubs were working, that had a physical space but no staff. And then some organizations, so for example, the library out in West Marin had, the library system had staffing in Novato through an organization called XR Marin. And they, West Marin School had space but didn't have staffing. And so the library, through their partnership in Novato, found out that one of the people in Novato actually lived in Fairfax and would rather work out in West Marin. So they repurposed some of their staffing. So it's really been an amazing collaborative effort for these learning hubs where the community centers have offered their space, the community organizations have found some staff, the school site have really pitched in to help out. MCOE has been helping with the site protection plans and the COVID planning in terms of PPE and helping them get set up in a safe way. So a lot of existing before and after care, so YMCA, BACR, childcare centers that often were providing before and after care for students, kind of quickly pivoted their programs to be learning hubs and provide this learning environment during school hours for students while they're in distance learning. So if you go to one of these hubs, you'll see all the kids with their headphones on and their computers going to school. So they're actually going to school in one of these learning hubs. So they're going to school on their computer, but then they've got adult supervision, technical support if they need it, or lots of learning hubs also provide snacks, they provide break space, they have at least some social interaction with their peers in these small cohorts. So it's really bringing it all together. We've had one convening of the Learning Hub operators, and we're going to have another one on the 20th of January. And to your question about what's the future of learning hubs, one of the big questions is, what is the adaptation that needs to happen as more schools move into hybrid learning and as hybrid learning expands to more than half a day or something like that. And so there's this really interesting ecosystem, real-time adaptation that's having to happen between schools and learning hubs as things constantly are changing. And one of the questions is, what role might learning hubs play during the summer to help students recover some of their learning loss that has happened during this year? And how can that strengthened relationship between schools and community-based organizations continue on into the future to continue to support students? Because as we all know, school is not, always has in the past, a digital element to it. Usually it was in homework or assignments, and students, my daughter just graduated last year and was turning assignments in on her computer. So the digital divide was having an impact on students before COVID. It's been exacerbated after COVID, and it's not going to go away after COVID. So students are always going to need this supportive help in the students who don't have digital access or who might need additional help. So that is part of the conversation, is how will learning hubs co-evolve with schools kind of through and beyond COVID, and possibly into the school year, where schools and learning hubs can work together for credit recovery for high school students who might have these D's, F's, and incompletes that are going to need to pick up those classes, and working closely with schools in that way, so that maybe the learning hubs provide that environment and the schools can help provide teachers or the academics, or I'm not sure what it's going to look like. We'll find out on July 20th, when we all get back together and have another learning hubs conversation. But certainly the relationships and the infrastructure that's being built to connect schools and families and learning hubs is something that we hope will continue on into the future, and that while the way that learning hubs are structured right now will probably change, that the effort and that those relationships and infrastructure won't just, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater at the end.
Yeah, that sort of comes back to this idea of one of the problems is this siloing of efforts. And it's just strikes me that the model of community, parents, schools, organizations working together to help these students get what they need is just, I think it's very powerful. And I personally would hate to see it go away. I think you started something important.
And it's really aligned with community schools initiatives that a number of districts have been looking at in terms of bringing community organizations, partnering with schools. So it's aligned with that effort, which happened before COVID started, and will continue on afterwards. So hopefully it's aligned with that and helping to move that forward as well.
Great. Does anybody else have a question for Shelley? I don't see anything in the chat box right now.
I have a question. We've heard very little about the issue of libraries, books, and students learning on their own in this discussion. I come from the past, I guess, but that was a big part of pulling people up by the bootstraps.
Well, the libraries are definitely a strong partner. They have been the they're on the leadership team of the Partnership Council. They're very much involved in the third grade learning and the early grade literacy work. So the early grade literacy team is working in Loma Verde and San Pedro schools, and they have learning pods. So they're working with Dominican students who are reading books online with young students and doing a lot of reading to students. And it's a collaboration between the libraries, Dominican University, and those two schools to help with early grade literacy. But yes, libraries have definitely had to do a lot of adapting and they are finding new ways of doing lending out to students without having to come into the libraries.
Yeah, and Marin County Free Library was one of the first libraries to really jump on board, and they reconfigured the South Novato branch to be a site school for the children of essential workers. And they were able to set up sort of a learning, one of the really early learning hubs, I guess you could call it, so that children could be dropped off there and they could be supervised and they could be connecting with their teachers. And I think that was the first campus that did that, the first library campus.
Yeah.
So that was started last spring.
Yeah, the learning hubs really did emerge and evolve out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they evolved out of that childcare for essential workers that happened back in the spring, and then this was the extension. And out in West Marin as well, they've been very
Yeah, it's excellent. Let's see, we have a couple of comments. One from Gabrielle Turney, such an important presentation. Thank you, Shelley, for all you do for Marin students and partnerships. And another one from Robin Diederich, has the issue of the large number of school districts in Marin County being decreased by merging at least some come up?
all the time. It is definitely from a collaboration perspective. I look at, somebody had mentioned, are we part of, we're part of the Strive Together. So we actually get to see when we go to national convenings, or I'm part of a couple of different peer groups. So I'm looking across the country at different communities that are implementing this, and my peers, and they're like, we're working with 3 districts, and we're all, and I'm just looking at them, oh wow, working with 3 districts, which means you've got only 3 student information systems, not 19 student information systems. And when you're trying to get data on things, so from a collaboration, and from a lot of it is around data and being able to use data for continuous improvement in the amount of time that it takes to get comparative data or aggregate data or even disaggregate data, because right now our education data from a statewide, or the regular data that has to be submitted, sometimes takes a lot of work to disaggregate it. So working with 19 districts comes up a lot in terms of pulling collaboration together among so many different agencies, nonprofits, and school districts. The way that we've seen a lot of collaboration and or consolidation kind of naturally evolve is through building those tight relationships, and starting with relationships and starting with shared infrastructure. So for example, putting together the shared attendance system for the learning hubs builds data trust, if you will, between nonprofits and schools, and between schools and each other. And once you build those relationships, those data trust, that collaborative infrastructure, then where it makes sense to merge, you already have that fertile soil, or the fertile soil of collaboration, those working relationships and trust that have built up. And that's the precursor to be able to have any kind of merger conversations. So they may emerge or evolve out of increased collaboration and collaborative infrastructure. But again, there's a high level of trust that needs to happen in that realm too.
And the follow-up question to that was, what about funding? So, yeah.
Yes, to be continued, or
Yeah.
coming soon, shall we say, coming soon. That is definitely a key conversation, is around funding. Because 19 school districts have infrastructure for 19 school districts. And so that is a conversation. As I mentioned, our website, we have started by pulling together funding information about all of the districts, so that we can start, as do all of our initiatives and all of the action teams, start with what's your goal? What does the data tell you about the current condition? So we look at the data of the current condition. And when we talk about data, we really try and look at data as both numbers and narrative. So we look at the numbers and then we ask the question, well, what's going on here? Why are the numbers the way they are? What are the stories behind the numbers? And talk to people with lived experience, people who are the administrators, all the different areas, all the different sectors, and try to understand what's going on with those numbers before getting into what are the solutions. That's kind of way down the line, is the solutions, but really unpacking and looking at the factors that are influencing the situation as it is, and then what shifts might need to take place. So with respect to the funding, we're in that beginning stages of collecting all of the information and then starting to ask, okay, well, what's driving the different funding, and what are some opportunities and barriers?
Great. Anybody else? Well, I think we should give a big round of applause to Shelley for an absolutely amazing presentation. Even if you can't hear us, we're all, some of us are on mute.
Well, I have to say, I have so enjoyed being involved with the league for the past 5 years or so, and especially the education committee. I've been personally inspired by so many of you that have been on school boards and other kinds of civic organizations and elected positions. You all were part of the reason why I decided to run for the school board in my local community, because you showed me it could be done and inspired me. And so I just thank all of you for the engagement that I've had over the years. And so it's an honor to be here, coming back and making a presentation.
Great.
Shelley, that was terrific.